I don't have any fear of publishing this on one site. I didn't have any other good ideas for what I should do on the one site anyway. What I had before was just my blog, and my blog is cool, but this is kind of fun. And so people can see a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis. I complain about my coworkers, I look at nerdy articles. When I share things from Google Reader, it shows up on here too, so you can see what I'm reading on a daily basis. I thought this was kind of a cool experiment, and people generally have seemed to think it was kind of neat, kind of creepy, but you know, it's not creepy. Like, it's not so much that I'm being creepy; it's just that anyone who goes to the website is kind of being creepy. You know, and shame on you, Hannah. So it's an interesting experiment, and at the moment, I mean, I have an open question on there. If you're an employer and you haven't hired me because of something on my website, tell me, because I'm curious. But I mean, that said, I work for military research. I hold the clearance of top secret with approval for really, really scary stuff. And all my things are on this website. I published, you know, complaints about my coworkers. I published that I knew people who weren't from the United States, which, believe it or not, they don't like you to be an international spy if you know people who are not from the United States on this website, and yet it still managed to work.
Can you tell us some like cool stuff you saw? And like you said, you worked for a place like a military somewhere.
For Norfolk.
Like cool stuff you saw there.
Yeah, sure. Actually, so the surprising thing about working for DARPA is that you have to have a very high security clearance. But everything we publish is on the internet, and everything actually, as they request stuff, is published on the internet. So most of it's not cleared. I mean, so I've talked about cyborg beetles before to a few of you. Basically, they took a very large cockroach, more or less, like big enough that it could carry a small battery, and they stuck electrodes into its very small cockroach brain, and they got a joystick, and now we can fly the cockroach. So, yeah, what? Exactly. But think about this. Miniaturization always proceeds. In a couple of years, we'll be able to remote control the fly. And it's way easier to get a fly to fly into a cave where there's somebody very bad we don't like and make sure they're there, than it is to have a predator drone with a 15-foot wingspan fly into a cave. People don't, you know, like, just shoot down flies, usually. They might swat them, but other than that, it's actually pretty cool. So that was certainly one thing. I mean, I saw cool robots that were like snakes and kind of slithered along walls, which is actually for disaster recovery. There was a cool technology we worked on called counter bomber, which was actually designed to detect suicide bombers. Because the thing is, if they get to a checkpoint, whether you agree with the U.S. occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan, I don't. You have to admit, blowing up big chunks of our soldiers is probably bad. When they get to a checkpoint, it's too late. They win. They get to do whatever they want because there's lots of Americans there. So the technology was actually such that at 100 meters, it could say that person wearing the burqa, that person is fine, that person has explosives under their burqa, and is a man or a woman. It turns out that's very different because of different body fats. And see them, and then pop it up on their iPhones. So you could say at 100 feet, stop that person. In the middle of a huge crowd in the middle of Baghdad. This technology hasn't been deployed as widely as I wished it was, and actually that was one of the reasons I left. As I said, you're killing our servicemen by refusing to commercialize this. This works, let's put it in. Even if it's only 50%, 50% less people blowing themselves up and having civilian casualties is actually a big deal. So, I mean, those are a few of the kind of cool things. The rest of it, you know, it's funny that, like, I always joked about if I told you that I could kill you. That's actually not the way it works, because if I tell you that, not only do I have to kill you, but they then kill me. And one of the neat things about working for the military is that Americans don't know this, you give up most of your constitutional rights. They can actually summon a military tribunal for someone who holds a top secret clearance and execute me without a court. While I work for them, not anymore, thankfully. But yeah, so it's, yeah, I can tell you, but I'd have to kill you is it's way less scary than it actually is in real life. So.
The first one is, what is the legal value of this status for the U.S.?
What is the what value?
The legal value. I mean, how can I use this status in a, I don't know, for example, in front of the court?
For court, okay, well I can actually tell you that, exactly. My parents are actually both trial attorneys, not the cool kind that makes millions and millions of dollars and then sleeps with people while their wife had cancer, like John Edwards. Sorry, if you're not American, that was just a really bad joke. But my parents are trial attorneys and actually both do a lot of constitutional law. But one of the more interesting cases was a child custody case my father was fighting, and this is all in public record. And the man was saying, oh, I have no money, I'm so poor, I never go out of my house, which is important because in the United States, you have to pay for the raising of the child once you've divorced your wife with whom you had the child. And so Dad said, well, you know, I've heard he's got actually plenty of money. He went to Vegas last week and won $20,000, and he makes $170,000 a year as an electrician. And he's just saying, well, I'm a poor contractor. Well, he's really not. Well, how do we find this out? Well, it turned out we wanted his MySpace page. He had pictures of himself with great big wads of cash in Vegas. He had he had receipts, actually. There's a social network called Blippy, where it automatically tweets, just like Twitter, everything you buy with a credit card. I'm not going that far. I think it's pretty creepy, because I don't. People see what I bought on Amazon. But wouldn't you like to know? No. Really boring. I won't do my books. We could see exactly what he'd been purchasing. We could see that he was obviously lying about his income, and the judge said, "Yeah, you're a lying scumbag. Pay $100,000 a year in alimony." So I mean, this. The legal status is the same as essentially what they publish about themselves. If they'd written a blog a few years ago or emails before that, they have the same legal status. If you can get access to see them, then you can see them. The difference is for emails and for other private things, you have to get a subpoena, whereas things that you publish on Facebook are publicly available knowledge. And so it's no more it's no more improper to use those in court than if I took a picture of you in a park, which often happens actually, back when disability lawsuits and people claiming to be, crippled on the job accidents were a huge source of fraud. One of the best ways to attack those was to have a picture of them doing the Boston Marathon, right? And you'd say, you're not crippled at all, actually, you're an insurance fraud scammer. Facebook is even more of that, and it's even more automated because people feel really comfortable, because people assume Facebook is public or is private. Facebook is actually defaulted to public. And especially every photo you can access. If I know the URL of your photo, I can see it, whether I'm your friend or not. This is, again, something to be considered about. If you post it on the internet, it's public. Even if you restrict it to your friends, it's public. So something to think about.
Doesn't this imply a series of issues related to the idea of intellectual property? And how can I prove that this is mine when it's published on
right,
because
so
this is my question about the legal value.
Oh, you have patents.
Yes. I mean, how can I prove that that is exactly mine?
Right, so in the United States, this is different from country to country. I'm not as familiar with intellectual properties as in other countries. But the United States is first to invent status. So things like if I publish, which would be dumb on Twitter, but if I go, hey, this is the algorithm that my company is using to do our cool four-dimensional lookups, if I've published that, that proves and timestamps exactly when I tweeted it. If someone else uses it and I later patent it, I can then sue them. So that's, and actually we use the internet all the time to break patents, because patents say, no one before me did X. And if I can go back 3 years ago and find an email to a big, nerd mailing list proving X happened 3 years before you patented it, I can break your company's patent. These things are worth billions with a B of dollars every year, and this actually happens. So again, it's the same as any other public communication. It does imply a whole lot of issues about that. And again, maybe you shouldn't, tweet out anything that your company is doing if you work for a company that is kind of secretive and for good reason. You had a question, yeah?
Can you talk a little bit about exactly what your company is doing? Like, what is Simple Geo actually, or what are the applications of it?
Sure. So one of the reasons I've kind of avoided doing that is because Simple Geo doesn't make anything. It's like chemical corporations. We don't make things, we make things that other people use to make things. It's kind of boring, but essentially what we do. It turns out that, yeah, actually, no, I can't draw on that right now. It's plugged in my laptop, so it won't work. So my company, basically, if you have a map, right, and as I showed you the map before, if you have those 10,000 data points, it's very simple with, if you've got, 1 or 2 people and just their data points to say, hey, Brendan, and Joe and Fred and Tom all checked in within half an hour of each other. I should tell them that they're all next door to each other and they can go meet up. It turns out to be incredibly difficult to do the same thing when you have 400 million users like Facebook does. And you're talking, for instance, every AT&T phone, most people don't know this, every 5 minutes, whether you signed up for it or not, checks in your location automatically to a social network called Boot. And so that's a huge amount of data. There's about 45 million AT&T subscribers in the United States alone. And so that's a huge amount of data. Every 5 minutes you have 45 million data points spread across the 50 United States, and I think Canada's where AT&T is. So what do you do with it? How would you say, if you weren't just being creepy, how would you say, hey, your friend is next door at the coffee shop next door, go and meet them, don't just have coffee here. How do you query that data? And we talk about 4-dimensional queries, because you have latitude, longitude, altitude, and time. That is that we don't want to tell people, hey, your friend's in the coffee shop right next door, when it actually turns out that your friend is overhead in a plane that has Wi-Fi and has just checked into the plane. That's a very big difference than if they're on the ground. So we do 3-dimensional queries plus time. That is, if my friend was here last week, that might be interesting to know, but it's not as much of a critical call to action